staff clean. So let's say Les is back and we bring him up.
Hey, can you hear me?
There we go.
All
Now
right.
I got a feedback in my ears, Xander. I don't know where that's going. Now see if we can fix that. All right, it's gone. Les, are you there?
Yes, I am.
All right, nice. Finally got it. I guess we'll start. I was talking about Joe Barry. We'll get to that. He's going to go to
Mhm.
Miami.
Yeah.
He's not going to be with Big Fangio. But first and foremost, we got to talk about Brazil and San Paulo. How about on a Friday night to start the
Yeah.
season? Your immediate thoughts and what that means for the Philadelphia Eagles. I think it's good for business. I don't think it's
Yeah.
necessarily good for fans.
It's not, this is the first time the Eagles have done something like this, and I've seen negative fan reaction on social media. When they went to London, it was like, oh boy,
Yeah.
and as you know, thousands of fans went, and it was, really a big highlight of that 2018 season. This doesn't seem to be generating the same response. I think, it's going to be a more involved trip, I guess, for fans. Maybe some of them aren't as into going to Brazil as they were to London, but also the status of the team, I think, plays into this. I don't think Eagles fans want to think about outside stuff and, carrying the banner for the league and that sort of thing right now. They want to get their team fixed.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
Starting the season in Brazil is going to be a bit of a distraction that first week. It's going to complicate, the preparations, and uh, who knows what the surface is going to be like. You think, you know, you don't want to lose anybody the first week of the season because you're playing on a bizarre playing surface or
Yeah,
something.
hadn't even thought about that. But
It
those
just,
those
yeah,
FIFA fields tend to be better than the NFL fields. So maybe that I know they
that's
had the
true.
World Cup down
Yeah,
there a number of years ago, and I know because it's going to be here. Um, they're making MetLife change its field because FIFA, unlike the NFL, evidently cares about the ACLs of their talent. So maybe that's a positive. I'm
yeah,
trying to
could
find
be.
one positive. Yeah.
Well, it's. I think it's an interesting thing to do, and it keeps the Eagles in the spotlight of the NFL. It keeps them as a prime attraction. But as far as fans go, it obviously it takes away a home game, which is something
Yeah.
London did
Yeah.
not do.
Yeah.
In fact, I want to ask you about this. At the time of the London trip, a lot was made of the fact that when the Eagles built the link, they agreed to have all their home games, regular season home games, there, you know, and that was one reason it was a road game. It was a Jaguars home game in London. Apparently, that's no longer the case.
Yeah. The only thing I
Uh,
can think about that is less with the unbalanced schedule. Every other year you have the extra home game, and this is one of
yeah.
those years where you have the extra home
Okay.
game.
I
So
guess
maybe
that
that,
must be the rationale.
yeah,
Yeah.
maybe that works. Maybe, but that's an
Yeah.
interesting point.
But
I'll
yeah, I
ask
think
about
fans
that.
were looking forward to the opener, and now
Yeah,
they're going
well,
to
that's what I
fly
said.
to Brazil.
It's the whole in theory. Of course, they
Yeah.
haven't made the schedule yet. So if they weren't going to Brazil, they could have opened on the road. A lot of
Right.
things could happen, but it's the home opener for the
Yeah.
team, and it's in.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that is that's a negative because people are fired up for that week one game. Now, I heard a couple players leading into the playoff game because obviously things were going in a negative direction for the Eagles at that point.
No
And
kidding.
and a couple guys said, maybe it's better that we play on the road. Didn't work out that way. They got waxed on the road as well. So it didn't work out that way. But their thought process was, we continue to play like this, we're going to get booed out of the building pretty quickly. Um, Now, is there a positive there? Because there's so much change. We'll
Mhm.
we'll talk about the coordinators in a second. There's going to be significant personnel change. We don't even know how Nick Sirianni is going to
Yeah.
handle new role. Is it good to take it on the road in a different way as the home team for that week 1 game?
Hadn't thought about that. I don't know. I mean, you think going into a season, there's going to be a lot of optimism and a lot of positivity
Yeah, that's
going
true.
into,
People
that's
tend
been
to
the
get
case.
optimistic. Yeah, they
Yeah, every
forget.
year, even when they've turned out to be bad, I I don't know. I just don't see it as much of a positive. I really
Yeah,
don't.
I'm with you. I'm trying to
Yeah,
look at the silver lining. I can't find many. That's why
it's
I'm trying to.
interesting to me also, John. It took the Eagles a very long time before they agreed to that London game in 2018. The league had been doing that for years and years and years, and the
Yeah.
Eagles were never included. Jeffrey just didn't really. Jeffrey Lurie did not want to be. They weren't interested in that kind of stuff. And now he's like, his statement last night was, we're proud to be the team that the league, suddenly they are interested in that stuff. And I guess a few years ago, different teams were given different regions where they
Yeah.
were
Yeah.
given marketing. Wasn't this where the Eagles were given marketing
I
rights?
know Australia was one because of
Yeah,
uh, Jordan Mailata.
yeah,
I thought the other one was in Africa, but I could be wrong. I'd have to look that up. It might be Brazil. It might. It might be. So,
yeah. For
but
some
you're right.
reason, from a business standpoint, the Eagles are fired up about this. So, Jeffrey does like to be the guy that the league, if he perceives himself as being somebody the league is counting on to do something, that's a big deal for him. Uh, I
Yeah.
think that was an underrated part of the whole Michael Vick situation a long time ago. Is Roger Goodell wanted to get Vick back into the NFL, and Jeffrey, and the Eagles kind of stepped up in that regard. Jeffrey likes to be that guy that I don't think he is, a Jerry Jones level player at the highest echelons of the league, but he likes to think that, he's Roger's buddy.
Well, speaking of, it's Australia, New Zealand, and Ghana.
Oh
Which
well,
Australia, New
that's got
Zealand?
lets that out then.
Yeah.
That was my theory, is that they had some sort of tie-in, but
I
obviously,
never understood that because they gave, as you
yeah,
mentioned, the international home marketing areas to each different team. It's like you're going to tell people in Ghana, "Oh, you're going to
yeah,
be an Eagles fan."
yeah,
I
right.
don't know how that works, but yeah, the league obviously wants to expand internationally, and understandably so. The Eagles are going to be part of it. All right, before we wrap up Brazil, Friday nights. Now,
Hmm.
this to me, the game's going to be on Friday night.
Yeah.
Um, First in since 1970 or something, first Friday night game. You have these weird games. We remember the Joe Webb game was on a Tuesday or whatever it was for snowstorms and things like that. I think the NFL's going to this. We're going to have a game on Friday. We're going to have the logistical nightmare. The television industry runs this league. Roger Goodell
Oh,
doesn't
yeah.
run this league.
Yeah, that's
They're
right.
like, we want a game on Friday. Can we get a game on Friday? And they're like, all right, we'll figure it out. Here we are.
Yeah.
Going to at one point see an NFL game every single day?
Yeah, I'm eagerly awaiting, the intro for Wednesday morning football, Uh, but the Friday night thing is interesting, John, in that for years the NFL resisted that because of high school football. They didn't want to stomp all over high school football. The same reason they
Yeah.
don't play on Saturday a lot during the season, during the college season. They don't play on Saturday.
Yeah.
They wanted to respect the roots of the game, so to speak.
Yeah.
And so now, well, I'm pretty sure there'll be high school games played that opening weekend of the NFL. But Friday night, the Eagles are on
Well,
TV.
I'm old enough to remember they wouldn't. They stayed away from Christmas Day because of the NBA, and
Yeah,
that
yeah,
has certainly gone in a negative direction for the NBA. So a little bit different, though, as you mentioned with football. All right, let's talk about Jeffrey, because Jeffrey's a big part of the
Mhm.
Brazil. You mentioned his statement. Um, Boy, I got to tell you, Les, we've talked about it when you were on before, and by the way, I don't think I told you. I think Jody's overslept. I hope he's okay, but he was on
Oh,
late
okay.
on WIP. Um, Now, from the standpoint of Jeffrey and the coaching staff, you've been
Mhm.
around Jeffrey more than most. I think he's gotten overbearing in the post Chip Kelly era when it comes to coaching staff. When you look at the setup, and one of my pet peeves early on in the thought process with this is you keep hearing this. Well, now Nick's going to be a CEO coach. I argue he already was a CEO coach. Now he's a CEO coach with no power. So
Yeah.
everybody's trying to look at him like he's going to be like John Harbaugh and Dan Campbell. I look at it like he's going to be more like, and you brought up Jerry Jones, Jason Garrett,
Yeah.
when Jerry Jones said, "Hey, Jason, you can't call plays anymore. It's
Right.
Scott Linehan's offense." How do you look at it?
Yeah, I have a lot of questions. I don't obviously Kellen Moore and Vic Fangio, very competent, very, you know, taken discreetly, those are positive moves for the team. But when you look at the fact that Nick Sirianni is the head coach and the people that Nick Sirianni picked for those roles are now gone,
Yeah.
uh, and they're also making what I think are some positive moves with position coaches, getting more experienced people with, reputations for developing talent. But again, you have the people that are moving out are the people that Nick Sirianni put in those roles.
Yeah.
And so what does that say about Nick Sirianni?
I, I,
It's kind of a shotgun marriage here, it seems like to me, of a guy and his staff. And not that he has no role, or I'm not suggesting that Nick isn't involved in making these decisions. Certainly he is, but if his choices were so bad to begin with,
yeah.
why
Why is he
are
here? Why is he
yeah,
here? Yeah. Show the courage. That's where I am.
that's where
I'm
I'm
glad.
getting to. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's they did everything but fire the guy, and it feels like to me, and I certainly am often wrong, that you're going to have a year where this is going to be kind of a mess, where you're going to have a head coach who's watching Kellen Moore, and and it's not going to be a great year, and they're going to fire him next year and start over again. I mean,
Yeah.
I just can't.
I've
I
even
got all the
taken it.
arguments about the 3 years in the playoffs and the great record that
Yeah.
he has, and so on and so forth. But it again, I've never seen a team play the last 6 weeks of the season, including the playoffs, the way this team did, and the coach not get fired. And the major frustration for me when Howie and Nick finally met up with you guys, and I'm not blaming anybody because I've been in those things before, is everybody's yelling their question, and there
Yeah.
aren't that many of them taken. But there was no opportunity in that format for anybody to formulate a nuanced question like, okay, you saw what happened. You guys saw what happened to this team the last 6 weeks of the season. What in the world? How do you explain that? And, why? And it just, they skated right over that. It was
Yeah.
like, well, the season didn't end up the way we hoped. And, Howie said something about, I forget now what his wording was, but it made it sound like they just lost games. They didn't just lose games. They
Yeah.
lost their playoff game 32-9 to a middling Tampa team. They weren't even competitive. I mean, somebody has to explain that, don't they?
Yeah, well, I agree, and it's not kind of gets lost in the sauce at times. I think if you go back to when you remember when Jeffrey went back to Howie after he fired Chip, and there was the press conference, and it was like, I forget his title. It was at the time, it was executive vice president of football operations, I think. And Jeffrey said, we're going to bring somebody else in as well. And then, Jeffrey only talks two at the most three times a year back then.
Yeah.
And then it kind of,
Now
the
it's down
press
to
conference
one.
was over. And then it was like osmosis, how he just took over. And there were no opportunities to ask questions about it. And it just kind of
Yeah.
developed into that. I think that's kind of what happens when you have these types of situations. There's so much to ask about. And I think when that post season press conference, I think we were hyper focused on Nick's
Yeah.
status and job
And I'm
security.
not criticizing any of the questions that were asked. They
Yeah.
were all good questions, and a lot of them were focused on what's going to happen now. Which is you have to obviously
Yeah.
focus on that. There just wasn't. There ought to be another kind of opportunity to discuss these
Oh,
things.
I agree. And by the way, I think Jeffrey should have been the one talking about it, because you
Yeah.
had two people up there who didn't make the decision. And I've
Right.
been pretty steadfast that people want to blame Howie. When it comes to the head coach, that's Jeffrey's decision. Jeffrey's decision alone. Granted, he leans on Howie's
Yeah.
advice. He's the consigliere, so to speak, but he's making the decision and he's not out there explaining it. So
Yeah.
I think first and foremost, that's Jeffrey's spot. He should be out there talking about it, but he doesn't want to be out there, and it's his team, and
No.
he can do what he wants.
And
Um,
I guess he'll talk at the NFL meetings this year,
yeah, yeah,
and that's
yeah,
going to be, SRO. That's going to be a lot
yeah.
of. There's going to be a lot of weight given to that.
Yeah, and there should be, and he'll start with the filibuster and cut it down by
Yeah.
40 minutes, and that's just what Jeffrey's very smart. He can do that. But back to the coaching staff, Les.
Mhm.
I get a feeling they're trying to thread a very small needle with the offense, and
Yeah.
um, I'm stepping on Jody's toes. I'm going to go the hypothetical route, because I
Oh
say
boy.
even if things are successful, um, and by that I mean if the Eagles turn back to what they were in 2022. So maybe they win 13, 14 games, maybe they go to the NFC Championship game. Doesn't necessarily have to be the Super Bowl. But if you're back in that type of stratosphere, um, who's getting credit? Ain't Nick Sirianni, because he made the
Yeah.
changes. You probably got a better defense. It's
Right.
all Big Fangio. You probably improved the offense. Some of the stagnation, the staleness is out of it. And all of a sudden, Kellen Moore.
Right.
What do you do if
Becomes
you're
a
Jeffrey Lurie? Do you fire the head coach? You can't fire the head coach
nope.
after you won 14-3. So Kellen Moore's probably a head coach.
He
And
might be, although he's had chances before. He's been interviewed before. Apparently, you hear that he's not a great interview. When the offense was doing well there in Dallas for a while, he was supposedly a hot candidate, and it didn't happen. So maybe, I mean, that is always the problem when you're relying on the offensive coordinator who is not the
well,
head coach.
I would say
You know,
they've had some great offenses in Dallas with Kellen
yeah,
Moore, and he is a very young guy. To your point, he's still only
yeah,
35 years old.
that's right. Yeah, but
Um,
that very well could happen. I don't know how it will play out if they have a good season. It's going to be really fascinating, and I think
yeah, I don't see the upside of it, I guess is what I'm
yeah,
trying to say.
right,
I don't see the upside of this. So
yeah.
I'm kind of
Well, the single most important thing that has to happen here, if they're really going to have success, somebody has to get Jalen Hurts excited about running this off, whatever this offense is going to be. He has to be committed to it and really interested and focused and happy with it, which I don't think was the case at all ever last season. Looking back on it, from the very first game, I don't think he really. I don't know if there's a problem with him and Sirianni, which would be really stupid on Sirianni's part, frankly. That's the
yeah,
one guy that you can't afford to have a problem
yeah.
with. But Jalen Hurts just hasn't been. Everybody talks about how stoic he is, but his his demeanor wasn't what it was in 2022. He's stoic, but he's not glum all the time, and he's not sort of sitting around looking, exasperated all the time. And that's how I saw him last season. And they have to somehow get him back on the boat and rowing with both arms. It's
Well,
and that if that happens, they've got a good team.
well, let's talk about Jalen, because we talked about Jeffrey kind of skating by a decision by not speaking about it. I think in a lot of ways, Jalen has skated by this downturn in his production, and people have blamed the coaches. Now, maybe it's the coach's fault, but I mean, you've been around this league for a long time. I always say it's personnel first, personnel first, personnel first. Doesn't matter who you have. Bill Belichick has had bad seasons. Andy Reid has had bad seasons. They didn't become bad coaches in those seasons.
Right.
So I always look at the players first, and he regressed. He wasn't nearly as good. Now, when coaches get hired, I always joke, the only thing, every team in the NFL gets the guy they wanted, all the way from head coach to quality control. It's never happened in the history of man.
Like the draft.
Yeah, exactly. Like the draft, like successful surgery. Have you ever heard of an unsuccessful surgery? When it comes to pro sports, the next one will be the first. Until hindsight and everybody looks back. So one thing that struck me while being on Twitter X on Championship Sunday, I'm following along. I probably shouldn't be. I probably should get the heck off. And I'm like, I'm amazed. Nobody's talking about the players. They're all talking about the coaches.
Yeah,
And the
Spags
coaches'
and
decisions. Yeah. And I'm like, these are not joysticks, the players.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Doug Nussmeier, Kellen Moore, Nick Sirianni are not going to fix Jalen Hurts if Jalen Hurts isn't doing his part. Are we being too soft on Jalen Hurts? That was a long-winded question. I apologize, but
That's
I wanted to set it up.
My answer is maybe. I tend to be a guy who takes up for the quarterback historically. Here's my thing, John. Last year's Super Bowl, at the end of that game, a lot of people thought Nick Sirianni had been out-coached. Nobody thought Jalen Hurts had been out-quarterbacked. I don't know. Everybody says Jalen Hurts has this incredible work ethic and he's the greatest guy and all this stuff. I don't know. I'm not around him. I don't go home with him or anything like that. You tend to, in that kind of situation where a guy has proved that he can play at the ultimate level of the game as well as anybody that has, you tend to think it's not him, when things go wrong. But obviously, some of these audibles that he made were disastrous. He needs to take responsibility for that. But I just think you have to. The talent is there, the aptitude is there. It would seem like, and somebody has to help him get straightened out here, I guess, is my perspective. That doesn't preclude him from being responsible for things or being blamed for things. But I do think, if he's the guy that everybody says he is, then an offense that really emphasizes what he does well and what the team does well, that he'll succeed, I guess, is my answer. If that, I don't know if it's a good answer, but
no, yeah. And by the way, I think you're 100% right. I think that, there's been certain comparisons because of what went on with Carson Wentz.
Yeah.
I don't like those comparisons at all, because Jalen Hurts is the type of guy who's going to work at very, very hard. And not that Carson didn't, but I think, Jalen has this extra sort of gear to where he really focuses. And he's very self-aware, it seems to me. He understands the negative parts of his game, and he tends to work at them. Now, I heard one sort of possibility that piqued my interest, and that was last year. If you think about the ship, the big contract, he became a star, as you mentioned, the Super
Yeah.
Bowl. He outplayed Patrick Mahomes. All of a sudden, he's getting all these endorsements. There's not enough time. I think the big when you go 21 to 22, he went out to work with Tom House and Adam Daydew in Los Angeles, and his mechanics got better. Now I'm told he went out there, but he wasn't out there as long last season.
Oh, okay.
Maybe because he was getting
Yeah.
pulled in a bunch of different
Could
directions,
be. Yeah.
and maybe that alone, if he gets back to his the system he set up before, maybe
Right.
that helps.
Well, I
I
think the
like that theory.
offseason for everybody was, when you go to the Super Bowl, they spent the whole spring, talking about conserving energy and not working on the
Yeah,
field. And,
yeah,
all that's got to be out the window. I'm not going to say Nick's going to change, and become Andy Reid and, put guys in pads and stuff. But I think there's going to have to be work this offseason, more than rest. And they've got plenty of rest since the first week of the playoffs, um, I think everybody can benefit, and I think Jalen can certainly benefit from having a more focused offseason. I don't think, even though he's still a star, I don't think he's anywhere near as hot as he was a year ago.
no,
And I think, it's kind of up to him to make that happen. And I think if what I've read is that he was uncomfortable with a lot of that and how it took him away from his work, and he
yeah,
needs to make that clear that he's not going to do it that way. He doesn't have to. He's got the money.
no.
He doesn't have to do commercials that he doesn't want to do. Make it your priority.
That's true. At Les Bowen, make sure you follow Les on X and Twitter. Before I let you go, Les, and thanks for hanging out with me this morning on Birds 365. I got to shift to the defense, Vic Fangio. Nobody's going to criticize Vic Fangio. I mean, Vic has got such a great reputation
Yeah.
for being a defensive mind. But I got to tell, I don't like this scheme.
Yeah.
I think the league has caught up to it. I think if you see all the people
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
used it, they were all in the bottom half of the league
Yeah.
last season. I think you have the best guy now who runs it, so you're going to have the best version of the Vic Fangio scheme defense. But I've seen this, and you've seen it with Tony Dungy, and everybody copied Tony, and then everybody copied the Legion of Boom in Seattle, and then all of a sudden it shifts. I think we're at that point with big
Yeah.
scheme.
I agree. Yeah.
Yeah, unfair or not. Yeah,
There was somebody, I forget now who it was. I want to credit. I read all this stuff, and somebody mentioned that no Fangio defense was in the top 15 in DVOA this past year.
Yeah, that was Jimmy Kempski.
That is striking, but like you said, it all has to do with personnel. I mean, I've seen years when we mentioned Spagnuolo a little while ago. I've seen years when he looked like a bad defensive coordinator because he didn't have the guys to do it. I think since Fangio is here and there's nothing we're going to do about it, I guess the way forward is to think about, if they give him the right tools, it'll certainly be a better defense than they had last year.
Yes, that I agree.
It might not be the best defense in the league, but it might still have some of the same vulnerabilities that the Super Bowl defense had, but it won't be just face down in the water, with one commentator said it looked like the three different levels of the defense were playing three different schemes.
Yeah.
You won't have that. And I guess that's what we have to hang on to here. But yeah, I agree. I don't really see these things all do have shelf lives, the league finds ways of dealing with this stuff, and then you have to go to something else. And I do think that we might be at that point. Yes.
All right. I'm always appreciative when Les agrees with me. I know I'm on the right track. Less is more here on
Oh
Birds
my,
365. Thanks for hopping on with me. You missed Jody.
very happy
Jody's about
to.
to jump back on.
Yeah,
I'm
tell
sure
Jody
he's
hi for
yeah,
me. Yes.
yeah, I'm sure there he's waving to you. He's
All
apologetic.
right.
So thanks, Les.
All right, guys.
The great Les Bowen. Appreciate him. More Birds 365 after the break, and Jody McDonald will be back. We can say hello to Jody this morning.